Zach Elliott, feel free to argue. I wanted to weigh in on this shooting incident that took place over the weekend where Representative Gabrielle Giffords was shot by, who was it, Jared Lee Loughner. And going to try to avoid the emotional pitfalls of this subject. I know people feel very strongly one side or the other of gun ownership, but I just kind of want to parcel out what is and isn't important about this and try to avoid those pitfalls as much as possible. So first, let's talk a little bit about the chilling effect, which I think is really unfortunate in terms of like how I think this is going to impact the relations between people in political office and their constituents. Unfortunately, I think this is going to chill it out, and it's going to chill it out from both sides. I mean, not only are elected officials now going to be more fearful of entering political life once they get elected, of interacting with their constituents, it leads to a tendency to manage political events even more closely than they are managed right now. You know, you want to make sure that you're sure of all the people, that they're your people there. This is the way that the situation is going to be exploited by the political classes. Even for people who want to be connected with their constituency. This is going to chill out that relationship as well and make them more guilty of what they're already kind of guilty of, which is being distant from their constituents, of being, I don't know, ivory tower, unaware of the plight of the regular people in their districts. So, to the extent that we feel that they're insulated now, they're only going to be more so in the future, as interactions between them and their constituents are probably, there are going to be fewer of them, and those are going to be much more controlled. As far as the actual incident itself, I mean, I think you have to look at it as being a natural consequence of the decisions that we make regarding gun ownership in this country. You know, we've decided that, especially in places like Arizona and Nevada, that we're going to put virtually no limits on gun ownership or even on where you can take your gun. So I'm not really judging that, but I am saying that it is unfair to kind of disavow these incidents and say that they are not part of the debate. I mean, I think they absolutely are part of the debate. I wouldn't weigh them that heavily, but I mean, I think it's just a matter that you have to view this as being a reasonable consequence. Because, I mean, nobody's saying that, you need to have a psychological profile to get a gun. I mean, so if we're not going to do that, if we're not going to require people to get psychological profiles, and nobody's talking about that, then it is a natural consequence that crazy people are going to get guns, and they're going to do what mentally imbalanced people with guns are going to do, which is cause problems from time to time. People are going to get killed, even representatives. So I think you can say, yes, this person is crazy. He may not be part of any political camp whatsoever, but the fact that as a crazy person he can get a gun, that's something that we just need to acknowledge about the way that we have our society set up at this moment, at least in those particular states. I mean, it's a little bit more restrictive in other places, but honestly, I mean, there's very little, unless you have a record of run-ins with the law. In other words, unless your mental problems have caused you to get into trouble with the law, your right to have a firearm is not going to be restricted. In a few states, it's not even restricted if you've had those kinds of problems. So, once again, I mean, I'm not judging, but I mean, to say that it's not a natural consequence, I think is pretty disingenuous. but let's kind of go to the next layer of culpability, which I think has been getting a lot of attention, and that is how responsible potentially, are people who are out there in the environment stewing the pot or stirring the pot, so to speak. There's a lot of references being made to Sarah Palin, like, her tweet, which was, what was it? Don't retreat, reload. The map that was on her website that had like crosshairs on her district, on Gabby Giffords' district. And then like her opponent. And let's see, that they had this was in an ad for a campaign event that he did. Get on target for victory in November. Help remove Gabrielle Giffords from office. Shoot a fully automatic M16 with Jesse Kelly. So, I think in these instances, now the one that went a little bit farther was, and I think this was the person who was running for governor in Nevada, who said that people should think about Second Amendment solutions. Well, I think this is an example of a Second Amendment solution, and I think we can all agree that it's fairly horrific. But I think that's another layer of culpability. I think that person should actually have been put in jail for that comment, for saying that anybody should be thinking about Second Amendment solutions to their political problems. That I just don't think is acceptable. I think that's a clear case of incitement. I'm actually rather surprised that person is still walking around. But as far as the other things, I think Sarah Palin and even, Jesse Kelly are within their rights to say those things. And when I say within their rights, I mean just barely within their rights. I think they're inches away from incitement. And I think it begs the larger question. Do you need to use this kind of incredibly charged language? Is this, I'm not contesting your right to use it. I'm arguing, do you need it? Because if you don't need it, then, and I think it's fairly easy to argue that you can make a strong case without using imagery which even suggests violence, then I think as a public official or someone in the public eye who people look to as a role model, as a leader, then I think you have a responsibility to not use that kind of stuff. I mean, you can make a very strong case for something without making your opponent into an evil enemy. So I think a lot of the problem here is a matter of individual responsibility. I think that people need to feel their responsibility to maintaining a civil society on a very deep level. They need to feel that very deeply, especially if they're leaders, especially if they're people that other people look up to. And while I would never argue for censoring anyone, aside from like I said, where I think cases of actual incitement. But I think, aside from those cases of incitement, everybody should be free to say whatever they want. But with every right, there comes an attendant responsibility. And to the extent that we live in a society where we know crazy people can get guns, I think it is incumbent on everybody who is in the public eye to make sure that no one is encouraged to view someone as being evil. deeply wrong. And someone can be deeply wrong on the ground, on the facts. And there's no reason why you have to, like, yell about them being evil. So, that's my feeling about it. I mean, I think this is a lesson in responsibility about what the consequences of free speech are. And if we're going to be realistic about the consequences of our gun policies, we also need to be realistic about the consequences of our First Amendment rights. It's not to say we abridge either, but it's to say that we need to feel deeply our responsibility to other members of our community in both of these areas. I think a lot of this was said very well by Raul Grijalva, who was being interviewed on Democracy Now! Didn't find it a particularly satisfying show. I think in a lot of instances they were trying to read too much into the situation. But I think how I feel about it was crystallized very well by Grijalva in this particular answer of his, which I'm going to show you a part of. And I think that's how we're going to end things on today's little episode. So here's Grijalva, and I hope everybody is having a good week.
But the fact remains that there's a tone and a tenor that's been set in our national dialogue that we cannot get away from, and I think that's the reflection that each member of Congress, each governor, and the leadership in our state better take very seriously. That it is words have consequences, as Gabby said, and setting a tone, whether it is through the shock radio disc jockeys at Arizona and elsewhere, where they continue to promote a divisiveness and a hatred, and then you have people that are listening, and I'm not going to draw the linkage, but in a frail minds and frail circumstances where you have demonized people, where you have made a politician that disagrees with you, not just your opponent, your deadly enemy, those things have consequences. You develop a toxic atmosphere like that, I think everybody needs to take a step back and realize that they have some shared responsibility. This is not about abridging free speech. This is not about the right to petition our government. This is not about the right to assemble. This is about responsibility. And as leaders, we lead by example. And the example has to be that we have to introduce civility, and the debates should be healthy. They should be hard fought. But we don't demonize, and we do not make people our enemies.
Congressman.